During the financial crisis, what was I? I was a freshman in high school and I didn't really care much about it. But when I got into college, and I was studying finance and economics, that was definitely, I cut my teeth on the history of the global financial crisis. And so it was kind of an interesting time because that's what ultimately influenced my financial perspective. Um, but I think that the financial crisis emerged through um, a partnership between governments and banks. And this partnership resulted in risk taking where insurance was provided that wasn't there in a variety of different financial products. So, what you would expect to happen is what happened. It's just really a question of, it was just a question of finding it over time. And there's some guys who got ahead of it and they figured out where that's happening. And that's happening in a bunch of other industries right now too, again. And this partnership that exists between politicians and financiers exists because they both need each other in some sort of form. Um, the financiers need the laws and they need the barriers that allow them to remain this small group of very, very large banks that controls practically everything. And they bring in the money and they're kind of the weapon. And then the politicians, um, shift back and forth between working for their firms or working for organizations financed for their firms and enacting policies that benefit them in some sort of way. And this is the game that's incentivized when you have centralized control over our money. And that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that bailouts will no longer exist. It will be impossible to bail anybody out. And this risk taking and this excess and a lot of these issues that people are so angry about, um, that will be significantly mitigated. Now, will it completely go away? Well, no. Credit will still exist within an economy with Bitcoin, and credit is a form of money. Um, so, as long as credit exists, there's going to be ways to effectively like bail out, but not something that would pale in comparison to the scale that things are currently happening at. And so, I think that's one of the big pieces. And your point about Occupy Wall Street and how that's kind of fizzled out. Um, that's one of the tragedies that I see, and that's something that the politicians and the bankers, I think, do a really good job at is pushing this narrative that it's maybe not as much the bankers, but the politicians looking for votes. They push this narrative that this is capitalism's fault, and and it's interesting because politicians used to campaign with a stance on central banking. And today, nobody knows anything about it. They don't know how it works. Nobody knows how our banking system works. And it's very confusing because it's circular. So people have a very hard time understanding how it works. And because of that, people are associating issues that come from our monetary policy and our banking system and the negative outcomes from that, like wealth inequality, like all the rising prices and why things are getting so expensive but people aren't making as much money, and where all this greed and all these bailouts and all this excessive risk taking and malinvestment and overconsumption, they associate all of that with capitalism because that's what the narrative in these mainstream media outlets are pushing with people. And then you have movements like Occupy Wall Street, like this is capitalism's fault. It is so far from the point. And it's a tragedy because not only do you have to, when you're talking to people, not only do you have to argue for some of these principles that you believe in, but you also have to help them relearn some of the concepts that are currently just ingrained in their head. And yeah, I think it's a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy that people think it's capitalism's fault when capitalism is what created the largest country with the highest living standard in the shortest amount of time in history. And people use that against what's actually just a centralized group that's controlling our money and sucking a bunch of wealth out of other people without them even knowing it.